So it's a pleasure to be with everyone. A couple of people asked me, because there's been this ongoing saga about me trying to find this home, and I closed in August and moved in, so in my new space. And so I've learned a little bit of something about expectancy, negotiating the real estate market of New York. But before we get started with all of that, I did want to have us take a moment of conscious intention, because in a little while, a number of people are going to engage in a march for the planet. The climate march that's taking place in the city, and it's purposely planned to take place in line with the opening of the General Assembly of the United Nations, because all of our attempts to expand ourselves spiritually, emotionally, etc., will mean nothing if the lessons that we're learning are not actually having us address the critical issue of the state of the planet. And it is not unlikely that something like Superstorm Sandy is going to happen again. And there's certain things that we have to lift the veil, if you will, around our relationship to Mother Earth. So if we could just take a moment of just focused intention for the people who are going to be walking and for the people who need to heed this message. Thank you. And I'd ask you, while you're still kind of in that space, to just consider, what are you present to in this moment about that past moment around the intention for the march? Because that actually is the dynamic of expectancy. It's actually when we set an intention and our relationship to that intention actually creates expectancy. But we have to a certain degree, distinguish what we mean by what we expect and what expectancy, what's at the heart of it. Because I love Merriam-Webster as a source, one of the greatest prophets of all time. So, the dictionary has this to say about expectancy: that a feeling that something is going to happen, the feeling that you have when you are expecting something. Not a whole lot there. But what I'd like you to consider is that, and the first myth, is that expectancy is not hope. Expectancy and hope are two different things. Not one more important or better than the other, but they are different. And sometimes we're operating in hope and we think it's expectancy. In that moment of intention that we had for the climate march walkers, that intention that you were holding, do you consider it probable that that's going to happen? Are you certain that that's going to happen? That then becomes an expectation. But if the intention that you're holding is dependent on circumstances, like, well, I'm going to intend and I'm going to engage in this conscious activity, but really, this has got to do with the G8 and I don't have any access to them. Or is it that you created this intention and then it's kind of like, well, I know half the people out there really don't know about the environment the way I love the environment, so I doubt very seriously they're going to move anything. See, all of that kind of gets muddied in the water, and then expectation devolves into hope. And they really are different things, because hope doesn't really have a lot of certainty to it. It's not a bad thing, it just doesn't have a lot of certainty. And there is confidence that's suggested with hope. There's an assurance in the possibility that something may happen, but it really is kind of like, maybe something might come along looking like what I thought I said. Maybe. And one is not better than the other, as I said, but hope and expectancy, if you will, travel different routes to actually access the divine. Because when you expect something, you really are kind of clear that it would take some force, supernatural or beyond, to prevent that thing from happening. And it could be as simple as someone, a friend, saying, hey, I'm going to stop by. You have no doubt that they're going to stop by. You're surprised if they don't, after they've said that they were going to stop by. But I don't relate to my breathing that way. Like, I don't expect to have my next breath. It's just there. So we have to distinguish a little bit that expectancy is not hope, and hope has its attributes, but it's not expectancy. Expectancy is a little bit more grounded and a little bit more deeper and requires a little bit more from us. So my second myth around this idea of expectancy is that being expectant is the same as being anxious. Like, there's certain emotions that we sometimes align with the idea that if I'm really expecting something, then I'd be excited about it or a little, on the edge about it, like it's really about to happen, and maybe not. Or maybe that's just not the only expression that expectancy shows up in. And I'd offer for you to consider that sometimes what we say is a state of expectancy might be a state of fear. It may actually be when hope is at play, but we really have concerns that that thing that we hope for is actually going to happen. And I want to suggest to you that I'm not saying any of this because I've got all this kind of hands down mastered. This is the unfortunate task of what it is to walk in the world as a human being trying to have a spiritual experience. Because everything that we believe and that we say is not often as easy to live as it is to believe. So probably the last time I'll talk about this apartment, in case anyone wants to know, unless anyone wants to give design ideas. The idea for me, this idea of having this apartment was actually something that was created in a word external to myself. It was one of my best friends who loves and cares for me and says, you need to buy an apartment. It's time. It was something that was a dream of mine, kind of one day when I hit the lottery and could actually afford to buy an apartment or a home of some kind. But it wasn't something that I was consciously working on or walking towards. It was kind of like a dream. And then someone, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience, that someone speaks a word of power to you such that you can't ignore it. And it actually just drops down inside of you, and you're actually kind of a little mad sometimes that they did it. Because now you got one more thing to deal with yourself. So that possibility got created, but I did not engage in that process like it was certain or it was probable. The majority of the time that I was dealing with the process and everything that was involved in me being able to buy an apartment was hope. And I'm really clear about that. And it's not a bad thing, but I wasn't walking in the world like this shall be. There's nothing that can get in the way of it. That's not how it was. How it was, how am I going to pay those taxes and get that lien off my credit report And will it be off long enough for someone to think that I'm not a bad risk? And what can I really afford? And la. And so with every one of those things to deal with, I was able to resurge the hope, but it wasn't so much that I was just expecting, like, this is my birthright, this is what I deserve, this is what's going to happen, it shall be. That wasn't the experience. And I'm going to suggest to all of us that if you can actually distinguish between when you're being hopeful and when you're being expectant, you can access the divine differently. Because when I was being hopeful, I needed God in a way that I don't normally walking around the planet. Those things that we desire the most, that are deep in our intention of how we see ourselves and what we want to do on the planet, those are the things inside of hope that you just pull to, like, please, 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 let it be. Please. It is a pleading. It is a surrendering unto the Spirit. Whereas expectancy is kind of like, I know God is going to work this out, and instead of worrying about that, I'm going to go get a latte. And I'm going to go sit down somewhere and look out upon nature, and at some point, somebody will call me, and everything will just be as it's supposed to be. That is a worthy walk and a difficult one. But it is something for us to aspire to. Because can you imagine the things that you've got locked up in hope if you could move them into a state of expectancy? The things you are hoping will happen, if you could actually move those into the world of this shall be. And I'm not going to worry about it. And anybody around me that starts worrying about it, I'm going to ask them to have a seat somewhere outside and away from me, because what I live in the world is an expectancy that it shall be. Faith is described in some ways as the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So my apartment was something that I hoped for, and as many apartments as I saw, with each contract that I went into and failed and went into and failed, it had to remain something that I hoped for, because I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to, and I don't know, for those of you who either live in a home that you love or you've bought a home, at a particular moment you walk into a space and you're like, I see myself here. Get this stuff out of here. Get these people's things out of here. It's in my house. So there is a difference. But I'll say to you that there was a moment, and it had to do with that emotional bandwidth, because I had been in 3 contracts, 2 of which failed for reasons that I actually don't even really know. And I said out loud, and I said to the mortgage specialist, and I said to my broker, and I said to every friend and family member, I said, if this contract does not go through, I am going to get a rental, because my life has been on hold for almost 2 years. And every decision around living, and I don't mean just that space, but are you going to put some money towards going on a vacation? No, it needs to go towards the down payment. I mean, it's all of that, like literally everything was on hold. So I said, this is it. This is the line in the sand. I don't care if I have shares in nothing. But in August, and I had actually said the date, by the end of June, if this is not done, I'm going to start looking for an apartment. And I started taking actions toward that. So on the same days that I would get alerts about apartments that were available for sale, I would get alerts about apartments that were available for rent. And I was looking in both places, because I'm tired now. I'm done. Expectancy requires a decision. Hope doesn't. And it's okay Don't come away from this talk thinking that hope is bad. You will cheat yourself out of the experience of faith. But expectancy requires a decision that you actually say, this is it, and something shall be. It requires a word from you to be spoken and not, because, we collapse sometimes this idea that spiritual is always silent. Sometimes spiritual requires a word. It requires a declaration. It requires a line in the sand that says, this shall be. And then you get to walk in this shall be. For those of you who are partnered, whether you like your partner or not is unimportant. But don't you remember the moment when you said, or one of you said, and the other one agreed, this we shall be. You remember that moment. You tell stories, and people are tired of hearing the story. But you tell it with great passion and devotion because in retrospect, for some, you've never said anything like that before. Not interested in really saying it again. Kind of like this one. Or as friends of mine who are in their 80s, married almost 60 years, she affectionately calls her husband this thing. But she expects that will be. She doesn't hope he's going to be there. She expects. She'd be surprised if he kind of decided, hey, I don't want to be with you anymore. It's like, try and get away. Good luck with that. Gonna hawk you. The last myth is that expectancy is just a human experience. That we operate sometimes like expectancy is normal for a human being. And I'm going to suggest that the state of expectancy has so much more to do with the union of who you are as a human being and what you fundamentally believe as a spiritual being, that it literally is the marriage of the two working together in concert that allows someone who can be hurt, both emotionally and physically, to be able to operate like, despite the circumstances that are placed before me, this shall be. And if you think about it, that's the foundation of any great movement that moves your spirit. Somebody said, women in the United States shall have the right to vote, and this shall be. Somebody said, it is unfair and not right that people of a different skin color actually are not regarded as human beings. And this shall stop, and this shall be. There are a bunch of people about to walk around Manhattan and say our planet will be saved in spite of all the evidence that says it will shatter any moment, and this shall be. And so I encourage you to really think about what's the word for you to say? What is there for you to say in your life and for your friends and family and for your beloveds and for the world? Because if we all say that which we've come to say and stand and be that it shall be, that might be heaven. That might be a little bit of what heaven is like. That everybody's word comes forth in the world to actually bring balance and harmony to the experience of life. I am a Harry Potter fan. And I just remember one of the most powerful moments, both in the book and in the movie, but I loved seeing it in the movie. In the last movie, when they're about to descend on Hogwarts, all of Voldemort's forces, there are probably like 4 or 5, there was the dwarf and Mrs. What's her name? And they start just chanting, and their chants create a force field around the entire school. And when Voldemort's forces get there, all of these people who would have them dead raise their wands and throw out these firebolts or whatever, and all it does is crack the force field. They're working for hours, casting spells, trying to break the force field. Can't do it. It takes the really evil one to do it. All of this to say, your intentions aligned together and realized can create magic. It is only thinking that we can't that stops it from happening. So I just want to read something to you in conclusion, and this comes from The Seat of the Soul, which I had inappropriately given the authorship to someone else, but it is Gary Zukav. And this speaks about the possible dynamic of expectancy. Think of what you are doing as entering into partnership with divine intelligence. A partnership in which you begin to share your concerns with the understanding that there is an intelligence receptive to what you are saying that helps you create within your own environment of matter and energy the most effective dynamics to bring you into wholeness. You do not need to think that you create alone, but rather that you are guided strongly in ways to help co-create in the most effective way for your healing and for the fulfillment of your contract. Consider your intentions and your meditations as part of what is done within the context of prayer. Be able to say within your intentions and your meditations, and I ask for guidance or help, and expect to get it. Expect to get it. Live like that what you need is being asked for by a divine intelligence that's great joy is to actually provide that for you. Live like that and expect God's presence in your life. Thank you.